Venezuela's economy isn't doing well. It's facing the worst humanitarian and economic crisis ever seen in the West. You see, Venezuela was once one of Latin America's richest nations, known for its vast oil reserves and affluent middle class. But one election in December 1998 changed its path forever. In under a decade, 75% of its GDP completely vanished, while the government's continuous money printing left the South American nation with a total debt burden of $150 billion. It's the most tremendous fall in living standards ever witnessed in the Western Hemisphere, pushing 95% of households to live in poverty and forcing over 8 million Venezuelans to leave their country. It's clear that they're in trouble. But how did it get so bad?
This in a country with some of the largest oil reserves in the world. But the price of oil slumped, and the government's management of the economy has been disastrous.
A troubled democracy, the rise of Chávez. In 1998, Hugo Chávez was elected on a populist platform. He came out promising to overthrow the corrupt old order. Once in office, though, Chávez wasted no time writing the rules his way. In 1999, a new constitution expanded presidential power and centralized control. Then, later constitutional changes abolished term limits, basically setting him up to rule forever. Critics warned that the result would be unchecked power, and they were right. In under a decade, Venezuela had gotten rid of all limits on re-election. This meant Chávez and his allies ended up dominating practically every branch of government. Observers said that under Chávez, democracy was dramatically weakened. The ruling coalition controlled all the institutions of the state: the National Assembly, the Supreme Court, and the National Election Council. In short, Venezuela lost the checks and balances that might have stopped harmful policies. At the same time, Chávez made his own political movement, the Bolivarian Revolution, and gathered his loyalists. He filled the military and bureaucracy with people connected to his party, and rewarded his allies while punishing any opponents. As one analyst put it, Chávez expropriated hundreds of businesses to nationalize them and do nothing with them, while giving plum positions to friends and family. By the end of Chávez's life, Venezuela had become an authoritarian petrostate. The ruler faced little oversight from any independent judiciary or legislature. Over-reliance on oil revenue. Under Chávez, Venezuela's economy was still running on oil. From 2002 to 2008, world oil prices increased, and Venezuela accumulated huge revenues. But instead of saving for a rainy day, the Chávez government spent it all. Actually, Chávez ran double-digit fiscal deficits as the economy boomed, multiplying the country's external debt by six-fold to over $100 billion. This fiscal expansion was financed mostly by borrowing and by having the central bank print money. Of course, money printing in particular was disastrous. It was a hidden tax on savings, causing inflation to grow even in good times. Chávez also sharply raised social spending during the boom years. His government poured oil revenues into welfare programs, the famous Bolivarian missions for healthcare, education, and food subsidies. Sure, these did temporarily cut poverty and improve some social indicators, but they were funded by volatile oil income, not structural growth. For example, gasoline in Venezuela was sold at near zero prices. This subsidy alone created a lot of waste. Up to 100,000 barrels of free petrol, worth over $10 billion a year, were smuggled out of the country daily. Similarly, electricity and other subsidies cost the government roughly 10% of GDP each year. Basically, Chávez was gifting oil cash to citizens and neighbors through diplomatic oil deals instead of building reserves. He didn't invest those oil windfalls back into the oil industry itself. Instead, he purged industry experts. After a 2002 oil workers' strike, he fired over 18,000 experienced PDVSA, the state oil company, employees. The technical managers were replaced by political loyalists, leading to a steady decline in productive capacity. In fact, output in high-quality oil fields fell pretty sharply and cut overall production from about 3 million barrels per day around 2000 to roughly 2.3 million by 2014. Those losses were masked early on by taking out dirtier oil, aka the Orinoco Belt projects, but by the mid-2010s, the decline was undeniable. The point is, Chávez spent freely when oil prices were high, but starved the oil industry of maintenance and cash, making the economy vulnerable to any price drop. Controls, nationalizations, and market distortion. While directing fiscal policy towards socialism, Chávez also distorted markets across the economy. In 2003, his government introduced an elaborate system of currency controls and multiple exchange rates. Official dollars were rationed at artificially low rates, creating a huge demand that went way beyond supply. As a result, a thriving black market came out for US dollars, with rates far above the official peg. It goes without saying that this system practically invited corruption. Thousands of shell companies sprang up just to apply for cheap dollars and resell them for a quick profit. Meanwhile, legitimate businesses couldn't reliably access the foreign currency needed to import inputs or invest, choking private sector growth. His price controls were even more destructive. The Chávez government set mandatory price caps on thousands of basic goods, everything from rice and milk to soap and toilet paper. In most cases, the caps were well below the production costs, so farmers and manufacturers simply could not make a profit, and many ended up stopping production entirely. Over time, this caused chronic shortages of basic foods and medicines. Grocery shelves that once held staples like chicken or sugar were empty. Actually, food vanished not just from store shelves, but even from warehouses and inventories, since companies started hoarding goods or closing shops. By 2016, insane shortages were common. Even light bulbs and diapers couldn't be found. During that time, the government introduced extreme labor and profit controls. It capped company profits and punished executives for price hikes. You can guess that this further discouraged production. Chávez also aggressively nationalized private industry. From 1999 onward, under Plan Bolívar, his administration seized banks, cement plants, airlines, farms, mines, newspapers, and even small retailers, often without compensation. In total, over 1,000 firms and millions of hectares of farmland passed into state hands. By design, these businesses were folded into the public sector, often run incompetently or as political patronage projects. A detailed analysis notes that the socialist reforms of Chávez's mandate destroyed the country's private sector, since expropriated firms were simply abandoned or mismanaged. Over time, the once vibrant private economy collapsed. Most nationalized businesses closed or ran at a fraction of their former output. Even before 2014, Venezuela was importing food and grain that it had grown and exported in earlier decades. Taken together, these policies, currency controls, price fixing, and mass nationalization crippled the non-oil economy. Domestic production was hamstrung so completely that by the mid-2010s, Venezuela was importing billions of dollars worth of goods, even as poverty worsened. At the same time, much of the foreign exchange collected by the state was lost to graft. Estimates suggest roughly $300 billion were siphoned off through corrupt currency transactions and schemes. In other words, instead of saving for hard times, Chávez's Venezuela gave away or simply lost its gains. Cronyism and corruption. As you'd expect, corruption became rampant. Oil money was flowing, and Chávez and his inner circle treated the state budget as a petty cash fund. Investigators have documented that literally tens of billions were drained from the oil company PDVSA in bribery, overpriced contracts, and sweetheart deals. One journalist reports that during Chávez's rise, soaring oil prices unleashed the most tremendous corruption the country has ever experienced. For example, former Energy Minister Rafael Ramirez famously declared PDVSA red from top to bottom and used oil sales to buy support for Chávez's ideology. He later admitted that the company's resources evaporated under his watch. Between Chávez and his successor Nicolás Maduro, at least $40 to $42 billion in oil revenue is now known to have gone to fraud. Basically, officials and businessmen from the regime got richer while the public got poorer. The practice of awarding contracts without bidding, looting state projects, and siphoning subsidies to friends meant that real infrastructure never actually happened. Of course, foreign investors ran away, and domestic entrepreneurs saw their property seized. So, money left the country. Chávez's policies gave power to the Chavista elite to use Venezuela's wealth as a source of private gain. Short-lived gains and growing shortages. In the early years, some social indicators briefly improved, which helped Chávez's popularity. Unemployment went from over 14% in 1999 to under 8% by 2011, and official poverty rates went down by 20 to 50% in the 2000s. Massive social spending built clinics and schools, and literacy programs reached remote areas. These visible achievements just brought support from Venezuela's poor. However, by the end of Chávez's term in 2013, the warning signs were more than obvious. Crime increased as state institutions degraded and the infrastructure crumbled from lack of maintenance. Shortages of food and medicine became routine. Despite oil wealth, Venezuelans were suffering some of the highest inflation rates in the region. Honestly, by 2013, consumer prices were already rising at triple-digit rates, and stores were running out of milk and eggs. The government often blamed economic war or foreign saboteurs for these problems, but the truth was that the policies themselves had caused them. After Chávez, how's Venezuela doing now? Chávez's death in 2013 did not change course. Nicolás Maduro, his chosen heir, mostly maintained Chávez's framework. He kept the same price and currency controls, and he continued to spend beyond his means to prop up subsidies. Critics say Maduro had even less competency than Chávez, yet he followed the same failed method, further isolating the economy. By 2019-2020, some regulations were quietly eased due to sheer necessity, leading to a brief stabilization. But by then, most damage was done. As one economic review notes, the policies that caused the collapse remain in place. Venezuela has yet to undo the distortions built up over 2 decades. With the courts and legislature still packed with ruling party loyalists, there is actually not much internal pressure for an overhaul. So why would they change? Truthfully, the story of Venezuela's collapse is not mysterious. It was not sudden. It was the result of deliberate policy decisions made over 15 years by a popular, corrupt, and powerful leader. Yeah, it worked politically, but it failed economically. This is a perfect example of how fragile democracy truly is. Venezuelans just took too long to figure it out, and by the time the system began to fall apart, it was just too late to stop it.